I generally get asked to talk mainly about surveys, but forms are what I really love, so it's always extra special. But I'm Caroline and I'm from the UK, hence the accent. But I was just saying that Seattle is one of my favourite cities, so congratulations to those who live in and around it. Let me see if this is going to advance. It is. So first of all, I'd like to give a shout out to your fellow chapter, Ladies the UX Brighton, because this came out of a great in-person event that they ran, and they very generously made all the materials and ideas in that Creative Commons license. So if you want to do an in-person workshop, there's some fantastic materials there. And it was so fun that I really thought this is something that I think I should share more widely, and I've kind of riffed on that and done some extra work before bringing it to you today. So what we're going to be thinking about today in terms of creating truly accessible forms, it's going to be, I hope, a bit interactive, and I hope I'll have the opportunity to see comments in the chat. Just make sure I've got that chat dialed up so I can keep an eye on it. What we're going to do is work through kind of a bunch of challenges, which I hope will give us some insight into what it really means to create a truly accessible form. We'll be thinking a bit about different types of disability, have a look at some of the best known sets of guidelines and advice, and then keep working through on that. So we'll see how we go. So first of all, before we get started on that, I want to introduce you to some of how I think about forms. And what we're going to do is try a Washington State task. So I assume many of you live or are near Washington State, and I'd like you to think of someone who has a Washington State driver license. So that could be you, or if you're out of state, you might just think of somebody. And that person realized today, oh no, I've lost my license. Okay, so we're going to follow along a little bit as they apply for a new one. And as we go, I'd like you to keep a mental note of which page on the website we visit you consider to be the form. Okay, so are we ready? You've got someone in mind? Let's get started. So I found the Washington State Department of Licensing. Is this the form? Just keep a mental note. That's page 1. And for me, I thought, oh, okay, how can we help you today? Cool. I'm going to renew or replace my driver license. I think we all agree. I think that's okay. So I'm going to click that one. And what I got was, okay, renew or replace driver license. Well, that seems I'm on the right track. Is that the form? Up to you. I thought, well, okay, that seems about the same, but the person I thought of was going to scroll. And when I scroll, I get this page, and now I've got some more options in there. I'm like, well, okay, I'm thinking of someone who's in state and they've just lost their driving license. So my plan was to, on page 3, my plan was to click on how to replace a lost license. And is this page the form? Okay, now I'm on replace your license or learner permit. So I'm going to click on replace your license without logging in. That sounds good to me. I click on that one. Oh, okay, now it's telling me what I need. Is this page a form yet? Not sure. I'll see what you think in a minute. What do I need? Okay, I've got to pay some money. Fair enough. I've got to print a temporary. Not sure I've heard print a temporary, but maybe that's very familiar to you if you're actually a genuine person in Washington State. So we'll find out about that in a minute. But okay, yep, next I'm going to begin. Okay. Is this page the form? Please complete a capture to continue. All right, obviously I've got to do something on that page, so I decided that I would scroll down. Here's another page, page 7. I've got to click I'm not a robot, so I'll do that and carry on. And then, okay, now it's showing me a picture of a driving license. And it's looking like, okay, I can just see first name required. So I'm going to scroll down and I get to a thing which is asking me, I'm basically stuck now because I don't genuinely have a first name of someone who's lost their license. But I think this is where the person would start putting in some of that data. So I hope you've all got some ideas. And my question to you is, which pages You could choose one, more than one if you like. Which one do you think was the form? I mean, I think we probably all agree there was a form, but which one? Would anyone like to type in the chat what their view of which pages? I hope you can see on those very small things. I've got some 8s coming up. I've got some 9s, some 8 and 9, 7 and 9, 9, 7. There's no right or wrong answers here, so don't feel shy. But oh, 1 to 9, yeah, I'm seeing a few 1s, some 9s. So we're mostly going with 9, 7 to 9. Some people gone, Frederick went 3 to 9. We've got some varying opinions. One person said 1 to 9. And of course, to me, this is a kind of a trick question. I would probably say 1 through 9, but I would also very much defend, for example, 3 through 9. Like when you actually get into the beginning of the choice, that seems extremely sensible to me. And then many of us would say, well, possibly the capture is a type of form where I had to actually interact with it, filling in something. That's another possibility I thought of. And then a lot of us would think, oh yeah, when I get to 9, there's the boxes for me to type in. That really feels like a form. So what I often think of is that we know a form when we see it. A lot of us said 9, which is a very reasonable answer, I think, that it kind of didn't quite look like a form because it didn't have the conventional boxes that we're quite used to on web forms, but it felt enough like, oh, here's spaces for me to type into. And probably if I'd started typing, it would have probably worked somewhat like a form. So that's the first aspect that really makes it a form. If it looks like a form, works like a form, it's probably a form. But I would always layer on top of that to say it's not just having some boxes. There's got to be some question and answer thing going on. You know, first name, a place to put your first name. That's a kind of question. And so to me, a form is creating a sort of conversation between a person and an organization. So that's the questions and answers part. And then on top of that, it's there for someone to achieve a goal. Like the person we envisaged is trying to replace a driver license. You know, the form part is probably not the most fun part of their day. They've got something else that they want to carry on with. And so we've got that sort of goal thing also going on, which is intrinsic. I've been working on forms for decades now, and I don't see a great deal of forms jokes. You know, they're always there for a particular purpose. So that means that we've got some interaction design, that the how it works, the kind of clicking and moving on. And we've got some content design, as we call it in the UK, which is the writing of the words and making sure that the words and the other content are working really well. And then over all of that, we've got a service design. We have some understanding of a goal that someone needs, and an organization needs to supply something to someone, or if we're government, we're making someone do something, or some other things going on. And all those type of design things mean that you need a lot of accessibility. You need accessibility of the interaction design, you need accessibility of the content design, and you need an accessible service as well to make the thing truly accessible. So the kind of first takeaway here is that for me, a good form is one that's easy to read and use. That's the interaction design. Easy to understand and answer. That's your content design or your conversation. And then easy to get it done and move on. And sometimes people say to me, well, how can I make a form more delightful or exhilarating or engaging? And I'm like, you know what? If you think filling in forms is something that delights people, you ought to get out and take a walk in a park every now and then, or hug your children. You know, give people time back to do things in their life that they're really going to get some delight from, and just make the form easy so they barely notice it. That's our success. Yeah, that's where I'm kind of coming from. So today in the kind of workshopy bit, we're going to focus on one specific question. So the scenario, which I hope is kind of familiar, is that we've been asked to develop a digital version of a paper-based form. And one of the form fields on there is phone number. So that's what we're going to do today in our design backlog. And we're going to think about what's the best way to ask for a phone number. And like, what could possibly go wrong? It's very straightforward, isn't it? Well, here we go. Got about 40 minutes to see. So let's just think for a moment about phones. If I say to you, have a look at your phone, is that a landline or a mobile? Is there only one? Do you have several? Do you actually use it to make and receive calls or for something else? If you get a phone call, how do you react? And is there anyone you can think of who has a message or something that's different for you? And whenever you see pencil, it's meaning, I hope if you feel like raising your hand and making a comment, please do so. Or if you feel like typing something in the chat, please do so. So anyone got any thoughts on any of that about good old phones? Do we have phones in the States? Or do we have mobile?
Sometimes phones are not phones. Sometimes phones are like iPads or other kinds of mobile devices that people are using.
Okay, so as Kat says, they're not just phones, they sometimes might be something else. I'm seeing some comments about do we have an extension to the phone? Peyton mentioned I don't answer phone calls from numbers I don't know. You know, I think that's a really common, that's a very Gen Z thing, I think, that we've learned to block them. So there's quite a lot of things going on with phones. When you say to me, where's your phone? I will invariably think about my iPhone. I will not think about my landline. Why I still have a landline, I do not know. I think it's only for people to ring me up and spam me as a small business. So I'm thinking about getting rid of it. So we've got different generational experiences, we've got different individual experiences, we have different definitions of what's going on. And Jen has asked, why do we need the phone number? I think you've been here before, Jen. That's where we're heading to. But that's the whole point of today is why do we need it? Let me just make sure I'm in there. So what we're going to do is move a bit beyond just thinking about us and phones. And our first challenge is going to be thinking about different types of disability. So I mentioned briefly thinking about someone else who uses a phone, but the next question for us all to muse on a bit is who might have difficulty using the phone? Is there yourself, someone you know, or a story that you've heard about that you might like to share either by joining in with a comment or in the chat? And this again could be a landline or a mobile, probably a mobile these days, but some of us still have landlines. So motor difficulty, vision or hearing, people who are deaf or hard of hearing, low vision, yeah. Jen's mentioning about text and calls. So if you're deaf, then that's different. You could do a text, but not a call. Or if you're blind, you could do a call, but not a text, perhaps quite so easily without using a some kind of voiceover. So we think quite a bit of disabilities that might affect someone's use of a phone. And in particular, I'm going to, oh yeah, phone is in English, but spoken language is another one. Yeah, color blindness. Yeah, we've got lots of sort of experience and things. And then cognitive disabilities. There are definitely going to be some people for whom some people just ignore an incoming call. Other people might be genuinely frightened by an incoming call. So need time to mentally prepare themselves for that. So as I've seen in the chat, I put in a slide here to something I expect most of us might be familiar with, but I thought it was worth including as a slide. One of the things that be quite handy for us to reference is the Microsoft Design Inclusive Guidebook, which indeed talks about permanent, temporary and situational disabilities. So Meredith just mentioned calls can be overwhelming. So it could be that, you know, our new parent who's listed here under a situational disability of touch might also be someone who is suffering from temporary cognitive impairments due to the fact they're absolutely exhausted. you know, and a phone ringing could be the last thing they need when they're short of sleep and they've just managed to get that baby quiet and resting, and then a phone call comes in, could be a nightmare. So we want to be thinking about all sorts of different reasons why people might have difficulties in using phones beyond just the conventional, well, not even the conventional, but obviously there's no kind of hierarchy here. We have to consider all sorts of different types of accessibility in our designs. So I'd just like you to keep one person in mind for the rest of the session, who has a permanent, temporary or situational disability that affects how they use a phone. And I'm going to think about Gwen, who is an elderly person. She's bedridden and confused, and she actually can't use a phone at all. All phones have to go to her daughter, who's a primary carer in terms of her administrator, but is actually in a different city. So how are we going to handle that when it comes to asking for a phone number? And for the moment, it's okay just to focus on one person, because as a team, we'll be covering quite a range of different disabilities. All right, so we have a challenge, which is we have our focus, which is how best to ask for a phone number in a truly accessible way. And we have a person in mind. Now, the next challenge is, I'm pretty sure everyone here will be aware of the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or as we tend to pronounce it in the UK, WCAG. And they're like an important step towards creating accessible experiences online. And we often hear people say, well, our site achieves WCAG level AA, which is one of the sets of guidelines that we've managed to get through. So I'm sure none of that is at all new. But let's just try challenge 2, which is, let's have a look to see whether WCAG specifically gives us any actual help for phone number. Okay, perhaps I could get someone to drop the link to WCAG in the chat. There we go. So it's that first link, the www.3.org. If anyone has the opportunity to dial it up on their device, just give you a little couple of minutes to see whether there's anything that you can see in there, if you have access to a device that gives you any hints really about how to ask for a phone number to help people with disabilities. But one suggestion coming through from Kat, thank you. Just give people another little moment. Okay, and one from Meredith. Okay. Yeah, we're getting some hints. We're getting be forgiving of input formats. We're getting grouping the phone number with other contact info fields. We're getting that they should have some help or instructional text. So we're getting some ideas. does any of the things that we've found so far help the particular person with disability that you had in mind? I'm I'm not seeing a lot of people saying yes. So our person might need multiple number options. Frederick's come straight out and said no. So when I tried this myself with Gwen in mind, I did not get much help. I mean, not that I disagreed with the advice on there. Oh, and we've got one. Yep, speech input using labels, large number format. So we're getting some things coming through. So it's not that I'm against WCAG at all. I think it's a very valuable and useful resource, and we should all be doing it. But when I looked in the forms tutorial, I realized that it was mostly about interaction design with a bit of content design, but I wasn't getting much to help me with what I would think of more of the service design aspects or content design here. Apart from at the beginning of the tutorial, I spotted this bit, which goes back to a comment that someone made, which I fully agreed with. Here we have users prefer simple and short forms. Generally, they do, and I agree with that. And then only ask users to enter what is required to complete the transactional process. If irrelevant or excessive data is requested, users are more likely to abandon the form. So I think someone, I apologize if I don't always remember everyone's names. I think someone mentioned about we need to know why we're asking. Yeah. So I interpret this as being encouraging us to think about why we're asking for the phone number. And but it didn't give me much beyond that. It didn't really tell me how to do it. So we're going to move on. Oh, one of the things I should have mentioned earlier, you may have spotted at the bottom, I've put some contact details for myself, and I've also put that the slides are all Creative Commons licensed. So if you want to use these slides yourself in a workshop or whatever, indeed, however you like, you're very, very welcome to do that. And I'll be sending them to you later and then posting them myself in sending them to the chapter later, posting them myself. But I forgot to mention that before. So anyway, we had a go at WCAG. We got some good stuff out of it for sure, but I felt I didn't get all I needed to do to create a truly accessible question. So our next challenge is going to be to try the same thing again. If we could just have those links again, because the second one was for the United States web design system. And thank you very much. So we're going to try that again. Again, I'll give you a little while to say, let's see whether that set of guidelines tells us specifically about the best way to ask for a phone number in a way that helps the person we have in mind, who has some disability of some sort that makes it difficult to use the phone. So I'll give you again a few minutes just to have a look at that. And any comments as you go, very welcome, or when you've had a chance to have a little think about it. So we're beginning to get a few comments in the chat of useful things people have found. That's great. Okay, and we're getting a few of the most useful links coming through in the chat. So I'll just give people perhaps another minute who are taking a little longer over it to get into it. Aha. Okay, so I've got quite a few really cool suggestions in the chat there, which is well worth noticing. So people have spotted things like void placeholder text. Avoid using placeholder text is advice that I'm always keen for people to follow. I'm not a fan of placeholder text at all. And then we've got some things which are very specific about the interaction design of what type of things to type in. And we've got some more general things coming through, like the phone number pattern. So just to show you where what I found when I tried this as well. I particularly like the one that someone's put in the chat about, do consider the safety implications of users who share phones and voicemail boxes. Ask for permission to leave potentially sensitive messages. So that's something that's really paying a great deal of consideration to that type of situational disability where you may not have continuous access to a phone and having to share one. So the part that I found, I think most of us may have found this pattern, how to create a phone number. I think someone dropped that in the chat. Thank you very much. That I did find this pattern, and when I looked at it, I saw rather enticingly that it had some guidance about accessibility on the side, which I thought would be very encouraging. And the accessibility guidance is okay, but didn't really help the person I had in mind, Gwen, because as I think someone pointed out in the chat, for Gwen, I kind of need to provide more information beyond the phone number. So I think I saw someone in the chat saying, why would you want to put non-numeric input for a US phone number? In my case, I would probably want to put, this is the daughter's phone number, and add extra text to it over and above the actual numeric input. So that would be my use case for why you wouldn't always have numeric text in there, but there's some more coming up. So again, it felt to me that the guidance was fine as far as it goes, although somebody pointed out there's quite a lot of it on the page to get our heads around. So I apologize if I've missed anything there, but it still didn't really tell me how to ask for a phone number in a truly accessible way. So I felt that, as someone has mentioned in the chat already, and as we've seen, we've been told to think about those service design aspects. We've been told in the US, in the original WCAG, to only ask entities to enter what was required. And then at some point in the US government website, it does say, tell users why you need their phone number, why you might contact them, and when. So to me, our next step in my challenge is to think a bit more about that service design aspect of it. And so this challenge is really about stepping back and looking at it from the organization's point of view, which is, why might an organisation ask for a phone number now that we're in 2024 and it's not just about talking to people on the phone? How would they likely use that number, and when might they use it? And does any of those uses of numbers actually cause any difficulties for the person you might be thinking about? So I wondered if anyone had any suggestions, perhaps for the chat, of how organisations now actually use phone numbers. Or just tell me. Don't have to do it. To verify identity, yeah. Two-factor authentication, yeah. And then sell our data to data brokers. No wonder we're all worried about giving out our phone numbers. SMS alerts, that's another one, another great one. Yeah. SMS, and specifically about texting updates about orders and deliveries to send reminders, yeah, of one kind or another. Updates, yeah. So we're seeing that kind of intensive use of the text aspects of our phones these days. And I don't know about you, but amongst my social group, we would typically text each other to say, is it convenient for me to call you? So we're actually using the text in order to set up a call. And also, that's a great one, Nini, in case people miss or don't respond to some other communication. And then also because compliance says you must collect that information. So it seems like occasionally, I think perhaps compliance is around collecting information, rather, as some people used to have a hobby of collecting stamps just for the joy of owning it, which we can't get away with in Europe. I still believe we're in Europe, even though we've Brexited. That's a whole other story. But there's all sorts of privacy implications these days, that we can no longer just collect information legally because we feel like collecting it. We have to have a bit more rationale. Clearly, if the law, as Jessica pointed out, requires us to collect it, that's a legal requirement. So thank you for those great suggestions. And I did think of some of them. I did think about calling someone to talk to them. I mean, that still happens. I thought about the SMS messages about progress of a task. Hannah's added an emergency alert, and then two-factor authentication, which is the first one that came to mind. So there are quite a lot of other things. We've added the compliance and the emergency alert for municipality to part of that. So we have quite a lot of different purposes. And when we think about those different purposes, one of the things I urge people to do these days is to make a question protocol. So we just sat and brainstormed it, which is a perfectly reasonable thing to do. But a question protocol is something I suggest to people, to organizations, as a more formal way of doing that, of actually looking at the questions in your form or in your service and say, why are you asking it? Today, if I were rewriting this, nearly a long time after I first wrote about it in my book on forms, I would call it an answer protocol rather than a question protocol, because it's all about how we're going to use the answers. But anyway, it is what it is, and it's a way of doing the due diligence of working out, for everything you're asking someone, how is it really put to use within your organization. And these days, that's something that our UK government service manual suggests that people designing government services should do. And in researching this talk, actually, I found out that the Irish government has now got question protocols in it, which made me feel very excited. So gradually, different governments are thinking, really understanding how we use the answers might be a good thing to do in government. And I think it would really be a good thing to do outside of government as well. So in a question protocol, you just keep track of every question. So pulling the version from the service manual, they're saying only add a question if you know that you need the information to deliver the services, why you need it, what you'll do with it, which users need to give you that information. And they added a couple of extra things. How will you check the information is accurate, and how to keep the information up to date and secure, which was the point about going back to Jessica's point about compliance. You need to know that that's up to date and secure. So an example in my question protocol for something like a newsletter sign-up form, a rather trivial type of form, might be that the answer we need to get, the data, might be someone's name. It might be needed to be able to, in a newsletter, sign up because you want to write to the user and identify an individual user. It might be used like, "Hi, Caroline." And the level of importance for sending out a newsletter, I would say, is probably nice to have. And if you don't get the right answer, then perhaps the worst consequence of sending out a newsletter might be a bit of a strange interaction. And I'd like to give a shout out to the website that I won't name that insists that the name as stated on my credit card is a better choice of name than the one I believe is my name. And because my credit card, being a British one, is kind of old-fashioned and calls me Mrs. C. Jarrett, the website believes my first name is Mrs. and my middle initial is C, and it always writes to me as, "Hi, Mrs." I've given up trying to defeat it, but it's an example of a strange interaction you can get if you simply insist that your view of the data you get is more accurate than the data that the users want to give you. So in the question of my phone number, when you're trying to make a really accessible one, it's about not just saying, well, we want a mobile phone number. And in this case, I'm going to suggest the example that someone gave. We're needing it because it would be, we want to be able to tell a user about the progress of an order, and we want to send them special offers in the future. And it's going to be used to give them those two types of information. And the level of importance about progressing an order is it's more of a nice to have. And you might say, well, that could be only one of the ways that we're going to use that phone number. That's absolutely true. And how are you going to balance those different ways? And if you happen to get the wrong answer or no answer, well, the consequence to the user in the case of sending an update on the order is not massively important, providing there are some other way of letting them know, and indeed whether they care or not about that update. But for another situation, like for compliance purposes or where you genuinely need to speak to the user, you might have very different things. So I really recommend to people that, again, making this up in a meeting is one way to do it. And another way is to go around and find people in the organization who are genuinely making use of it and see what they make of it. And when I've done that, when I've really been doing my question protocols, it's quite common to discover questions which are being asked just because you've always asked for them, in that sort of collecting the information as if it were a hobby. You know, for example, literally on Sunday, I got asked to fill in this form, and Meredith has spotted the one that really amused me. It's still asking me for facts. Yeah. Now, don't know about you in the States, but we haven't used faxes in about 15 years. And it's just like, what? So they're collecting information that they really don't need. In fact, I'm not blaming the organization that sent me this form. I'm blaming their payment provider, but really a payment provider should get up to date. So it's also valuable to prune out questions that you don't need. And that really is also an accessibility thing as well, because there's a cognitive burden on people from answering questions that could really puzzle someone with certain type of cognitive disabilities. So I recommend that you go out and do that work, not just for phone number, but for everything else. And then if we had a bit more time and we were in the opportunity to do this as a group, as we did in Brighton, my next suggestion would be that we would actually sit there and do some content design due diligence around writing the words and understanding the service, so that we actually really did create that accessible question. And so, for getting a phone number for progress on an order, we need to obtain a phone number, but also allow for some sort of choice about whether or not you give that phone number. That would be my challenge. Or if we were doing this face to face as a group and we had a little more time, we might have different groups trying different sorts of reasons, and then see if we could converge on asking for one phone number for more types of use. So one of the things I typically recommend for this particular use case is to consider some kind of filter question. So this one is a slightly different thing. This is not the sending a progress update on the order, but again, I got this one genuinely the other day, where they've created a filter question, which is asking me my preference for how I'd like to be updated with news and offers. And I've got the choice of getting those news and offers by post, by telephone, by email. And I assume that once it's told me that they're going to spam me with news and offers from some dubious insurance company, that then I would get them phoning me up all day. So I found it in my heart to not tick that box. And the reason I consider is because the idea of having that kind of choice is actually a good idea. But if you do it, then you've got to actually test it with some real people to make sure the question itself is not repellent. I mean, you may read it quite differently to me, but I was reading it as, how many ways would you like to spam us to spam you? And I found that I didn't want any of them. Thank you very much. So whether they had any other intention of using my phone number, but they didn't get a phone number from me. So it's the idea is a good one. I'm not giving that as advice to exactly follow, because you have to test those questions with the real people, just like you test everything else, to make sure that they're genuinely actually working. So I guess that's the sort of challenges I would take people through, and we might have a longer workshop sometime to do it. Again, if this workshop appeals to you, please feel welcome to use it and adapt it. But I'm going to wrap up. Oh, what happened then? Yeah, wrap up a bit on, we've talked a lot about phone numbers, but it is really worth putting extra effort into these so-called easy questions. So name, email, password, phone, postcode. Someone mentioned that you can work out a lot about an address from the zip code. In the US, postcode is our equivalent address. All of these things are very much ubiquitous on forms. We get a lot of them on a lot of different forms. And my friends over at Zuko did a really good blog post pointing out that these questions have really high abandonment rate, right? So it's like a lot of people are dropping out because of these apparently straightforward questions. And that's just everybody. That's not even considering our challenge today was about really paying attention to whether there'd be a barrier for people with access or disability needs. And I thought I'd quote to you some of the things that Zuko actually mentioned. They basically said about phone number what we've all learned, that I was not going to give my phone number to those spammers. Users hate giving you their phone number, and they advise exactly what WCAG and the US website told us. If you really must, then explain why you need it. Yeah. In their case, a simple line saying that you need their number in case there are any issues with deliveries will do wonders for the completion rate on your phone field. So it's not only about our duty of care to people with disabilities, it's also about our duty of care for delivering what our organisations need in terms of service design. And then they also mention, I mean, I've concentrated a lot on service design type questions, but the interaction design really matters. So they've said, more than any field, phone numbers have a cornucopia of ways you can potentially enter the information? Do you add a plus, a country code, spaces or dashes? Yeah. So I'm like, I really empathized with this because I happen to have dyscalculia, which is like dyslexia, but with numbers. So I have a lot of problems transferring numbers, understanding numbers, dates if the month isn't spelt out. And so people like us, people with dyscalculia, it's like, if you've got a phone number for me, please don't ask for it again. Let me give it to you once and have it done with. Possibly show it to me on screen and let me check that it's the right one. Let me copy the phone number into the form. That will help me immensely. I can just go copy. And also, if it's a two-factor authentication, letting me type in like the brackets that you have on US phone numbers, spaces, pluses, and so on. When you give me an error message, please be very specific about it and give me extra time. Like two-factor authentication is always terrifying for me because I've got to get that 6-digit code, which is genuinely very hard for me to read, and transfer it from my phone into the computer. That takes me extra time to do. It's just hard. And so I can be proud of my own disability and ask you all to help me. So there we go. That was my final plea. And overall, what I really wanted to emphasize is that we need to do a lot of accessibility. Like, we do have to do our WCAG and our due diligence on the interaction design, but we have to also give a lot of attention to how we write the words, how to explain how we're going to use a phone number or anything else, and what the service really requires. What's the genuine use of that, and how can we explain that to our users and get them on side with us? So that was me. We've got a few minutes left for some questions and further comments. And thank you. My lovely publisher over at Rosenfeld Media has given us a discount code if anyone would like to buy my book, which is on surveys. Please, I hope that will be handy for you. It only works through Rosenfeld Media. But any comments, questions, anyone want to throw in their own reflections on the day? That would be fantastic. So we've got probably a few minutes for questions. And thank you for the very kind comments. I'm going to just sit here and soak up the lovely remarks. But anyone else got anything to add? That would be lovely.
I do have a question.
Go for it.
This is Kat Overman. One of the things that I'm running into a lot with forms is getting the error message right. So if I'm putting in the helper text what the format for SPIGs and, for example, the phone number needs to be, then the error message needs to incorporate that information because it's replacing the helper text that has the formatting info. But I'm struggling a lot with like how to phrase, because it could be enter a valid phone number in this format. It could be just phone number is required. Do you have thoughts on the best way to handle error messages for accessibility in forms?
Well, I think a couple of the error messages that you suggested, phone number is required. That's not really told me. That's told me that I've missed giving you a phone number, which is important information. But did it tell me enough? Yeah, it didn't really emphasize that reason. So why do you require it? So phone number is required. I might suggest, for example, we need your phone number so that we can validate, we can send you an authentication code, or we need your phone number so that we can contact you. So thinking about why might someone not have filled that in, it could be that they just didn't notice it, in which case phone number is required is fine, but there could be some other reason going on. And for like so much of this, it's also what I think, what you think, what someone else thinks is all very well, but the real answer is to get out there and test it with some users. Yeah, and particularly make sure that you include people with disabilities, carers, people from disadvantaged communities, all sorts of different people in your users when you do some testing, and make sure that you try things like your error messages so that they're included in the testing. Yeah, and that we don't just rely on people getting it right. So I hope that answers it. I'm getting some other great questions, which I'm hoping someone could possibly copy and send to me, because I might not have time to cover all of them. But just going back, scrolling back a bit, Kat asked, what was the most difficult topic to write about for your Surveys That Work book? Kat, it was surveys. I don't really like surveys, and I kind of had to knuckle down and read a lot of complicated survey methodology textbooks when I'd have rather been working on forms. So that was something I did to help you, I think. Got some very nice comments and suggestions about an accessible library. Meredith asked, I work on a technical B2B product that's a lot of forms, advanced search, and we struggle a lot with titles. Any suggestions for resources? I think the answer to that is your best resource is to ask some of the people who genuinely use those, who genuinely use that thing. Like if it's a very technical product, then one of the things I say about plain language is I follow Ginny Reddish's advice, which is on plainlanguage.gov, and have a very user-centered definition. So it's writing for the people who are going to use it and using words that are familiar to them is what really matters. So if it's a very technical product, I might think it's jargon, you might think it's jargon, but are those the familiar words for those users? You can only really find that out by going and asking them. So I hope that's another reason for doing more testing. Veronica asked about overall structure of form, multi-page versus one page, one column or two column. And I'm was working with UK Government Digital Service when we came up with the concept of one thing per page. So the advice is often quoted as one thing per page, but it should really be begin prototyping with one thing per page. So split it all out so you have one question on a page, and then do user research with your users where you do some testing and say, how would you group this? Yeah. Is it fine? We've discovered in UK government that a lot of approach and use people who don't fill in that form all day, every day, are perfectly fine with just having one question on a page and that's it. And then there's another pattern called a task list, which helps people to kind of tackle complex forms in different ways. So begin your prototyping with just one thing per page, one column, one question, and then do user research into how to group them. If it's for a very technical audience and they're going to be living in that form all day, then the one thing they might have a lot of questions. But generally, if it's approach or use for the general public, just one question at a time is a great way to start. Thanks for posting the link to gov.uk. Yeah, I think that, have I covered everything? Have I managed to grab everyone's questions? Maybe I have. If I haven't, I love answering questions on forms, as you can tell. Please feel very, very welcome to email me, contact me on LinkedIn. On social media these days, I'm mostly on Blue Sky. I won't say I never check Twitter. I do occasionally, but you won't catch me quite as quickly on there. Generally, I'm checking LinkedIn and Blue Sky a lot more often. So really appreciate everyone coming along and taking their time to share their thoughts in the chat, and some great questions as well. And really appreciate being asked to come. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Caroline. Thank you so much for your time and your expertise, and your very invaluable, talk to us about the forms. Gives us a lot to think about. We will send the presentation to you. It would be added on the Meetup page comments, and also you'll get an email from Meetup. And we hope to post this on our YouTube channel sometime in the near future. And if you want to learn more about Caroline's work, effortmark.co.uk, the one you see on screen, she has a treasure trove of resources listed on there. And our Rosenfeld Media has given us a discount code for Caroline's book about surveys, and that's valid till July 5th. It gives you a 20% off, so please do use that. And thank you so much for coming.
It's been a joy. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.